you saw last week, TikTok and ByteDance basically put a full court press on this bill where anybody in the United States who was using TikTok got a pop-up notification on their phone. They're like, by the way, they're trying to ban TikTok. Here's a number for you to call your congressman and tell them that they shouldn't do that.
Hi, Bill Kristol here with my colleague Andrew Egger, co-author of Morning Shots, which undoubtedly you already subscribe to, the newsletter, but you should get it each morning around 9:30. Just go to thebulwark.com. And this is a video Morning Shots follow-up where we're going to discuss the lead topic in this morning's Morning Shots, which was Andrew's piece on TikTok and the vote on TikTok, which has now happened. You know, we do a Morning Shots, then the House hops to it and votes. So talk about what you wrote this morning and about the House vote that just happened about half an hour ago.
Yeah, it's odd. We publish at 9:30 and then they get together at 10. So when we wrote, we weren't 100% sure what was going to happen, but it turns out that the House, overwhelmingly decided to pass this bill, which some people are calling a TikTok ban. It's a little more complicated than that. Essentially, the House is forcing an ultimatum on TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, a Chinese company. They're essentially saying, we're fine with this app existing here, but we no longer want you to own it. You are too close to the Chinese Communist Party. We're unhappy with the level of data collection you're doing. We're unhappy with the possibility of a foreign adversary influencing kind of algorithmic content, shaping the way so many Americans are viewing the world. And this bill kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, it's been something like this on the table for quite some time. Donald Trump proposed a similar thing way back in 2020, but the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party kind of rolled something like this out, just kind of with not a whole lot of fanfare, just pretty recently, and the Energy and Commerce Committee moved it forward unanimously last week, and we, like I said, saw this overwhelming vote from the House of something like 350 to 65 to move it over to the Senate today.
Yeah, I read about this and I hadn't been paying that much attention to it. I mean, I'd read some stuff on information warfare and the Chinese, not just potentially, but were actually using the algorithm here to influence what Americans saw on TikTok. But I thought maybe this is just a kind of stunt, and people have a big interest these days in being hawkish on China, and I'm for that, but sometimes it's just performative. But I talked to a couple of genuine foreign policy experts, one guy who teaches Chinese foreign policy in China last night, and he said, no, they both said this is real. It's a real problem. Information warfare is part of the Chinese concept of systems warfare, and to simply let them have access to everyone in America and then use their algorithm to, shape the news people see is not sensible, and that this is a prudent thing to do. And the China committee that I think wrote the bill is a serious committee with some, relatively, certainly by House standards, but even by absolute standards, sensible and serious people on it. So, bipartisan vote. What was it, about 3-1 among Republicans and 10-15-1 among Democrats. So that's a little bit of a surprise. Aren't the Republicans supposed to be the hawkish on China party?
So that's the way it has kind of been, and a lot of this stuff, when it first started spinning up, the kind of anti-TikTok stuff, it was a lot of initiatives of the Trump administration, which is why it was pretty surprising last week that we had former President Donald Trump come out and say, well, actually, it turns out I'm not necessarily so hot on this package. He's saying, there's these national security problems with TikTok, but a lot of kids really like TikTok. And at the same time, are we sure that banning TikTok wouldn't just lead to a big windfall for Facebook, which I hate even worse than TikTok, Donald Trump says. And so it's led to these bizarre kind of snarled political lines of incentive where you have seen some Republicans kind of take a step back away from this bill because of Trump, but like you said, overwhelmingly in the House still supported it. At the same time, President Biden has said he would sign this bill, although he's not out there cheerleading all over it or anything like that. But he's like, yeah, it seems like a serious concern, and if it gets to my desk, I'd sign it. So we will see what happens when it gets to the Senate. I mean, there's been some splashes of resistance among guys like Rand Paul, who has kind of couched it as a free speech issue, and we will see. But I mean, I think it's a strong indication that there is a real bipartisan momentum behind this bill, just given how lopsided the total was today.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because I've talked to people though who follow the Senate closely who say, well, the Senate wants, they're going to take a long look. maybe not in an election year, this overwhelming vote in the House, but the purpose of the Senate is to slow these kinds of things down. It'll be interesting to see whether they actually move on it in this election year. But, you wrote yesterday, I guess, about the donor who may have influenced Trump. And then Trump has these close associates of his, Kellyanne Conway, and others who work directly or indirectly for TikTok. And no secret, they register and so forth. And they've been influencing Trump, perhaps. But I wonder how much, and you discussed this morning, I discussed it a little bit in my item too, how much is Trump being or think he's being clever politically? How much has he noticed that, tens of millions of Americans are on TikTok. A lot of them really like it. A lot of them are sort of younger voters who aren't that interested in politics, but who could vote in this presidential election. And do you want to be the guy who took TikTok away from them? I mean, I was thinking about this last night. It is an unusual vote, an unusual piece of legislation in that it directly takes something away. I mean, if it turns out to be a ban, which I think it would be in practice, that they're people are used to, right? Mm-hmm. And that's like a tax increase or something. I mean, most pieces of legislation, we could argue forever, does it indirectly make healthcare better or worse? Does it indirectly, strengthen the country or weaken the country and all this kind of, this is a pretty direct thing. And I wonder if Trump's little, lizard brain is thinking, you know what? I don't want to let Biden sign this bill.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say I would have done. I'm against China. I'm against Chinese influence operations like this. But I would have done it better. I wouldn't have done it this way. I wouldn't have taken this wonderful thing away from people who are using it for good reasons. My kids like it, or my grandchildren. Or so I'll find someone who likes it. I mean, do you think how much of the politics entered Trump? How much was it donor driven?
Yeah, well, and I mean, we talked just a minute ago about how this bill kind of came out of nowhere, even for us, and we pay insane amounts of attention to the news relative to the median American. And I mean, there is a real, I mean, the thing that the bill's authors are kind of couching this all in is, look, like, we're not banning TikTok. It'll be up to ByteDance whether to sell or not. If it were up to us, TikTok will still exist. It'll just be owned by an American company. That's kind of, I call that the Goldilocks scenario this morning, is these guys get this policy win, they shore up their foreign policy, and nothing changes for the users. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, you saw last week, TikTok and ByteDance basically put a full court press on this bill where anybody in the United States who was using TikTok got a pop-up notification on their phone. They're like, by the way, they're trying to ban TikTok. Here's a number for you to call your congressman and tell them that they shouldn't do that. And we saw basically all over the Capitol Hill, these offices got inundated by calls. It backfired a little bit, actually. They're like, oh, wow, TikTok actually is pretty politically powerful. Maybe we should push back on that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think part of this is Trump seeing, I mean, it's one of the benefits of being out of power. I mean, he actually doesn't have any responsibility for any of this. He's like, wow, this could actually kind of blow up in people's faces. So I think there's a lot of things pushing him in one direction. There's his associates, there's his donors, and then there's also the possibility of this kind of like big and relatively open political lane right now where Congress is into banning TikTok. Biden is okay with the possibility of banning TikTok, and you get Trump in there saying we love our TikTok, don't we, folks? Yeah,
I'll be interested to see if Kellyanne Conway does some poll, or they arrange some polls this weekend. People do react a little bit if the company itself is pressuring you overtly, but if there are a couple of polls in the next week that show, gee, most Americans really don't understand this, aren't in favor, think at least we need to look at it longer. Pretty good excuse for some of the senators to back off. I wonder how much we'll see even some of these members of the House who were in tough re-election campaigns flip a little bit. I wonder if there'll be some Democratic erosion on this issue too. And
it's been interesting to see the way that Biden himself has messaged.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. So you've been in the White House yesterday. I think you were at the White House press briefing. There were a couple of questions on this. It feels to me like they're a little nervous about the politics of this, even though they think substantively it's the right thing to do.
I think that's exactly right. I think that they're basically saying, look, I mean, when you look at these national security issues, obviously this is a kind of thing that's kind of a gaping wound for us that we should address in some way. But they're not, I mean, they are certainly not making this like any kind of a centerpiece of their own kind of political aspirations right now. His campaign is not messaging on it. Biden has hardly talked about it except to say that he would sign the bill. His surrogates at the White House, the officials who, it was National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan who spoke yesterday, essentially saying, look, we're monitoring these things, we're providing support, we've said we'd sign this bill, and also saying, we are also hoping that TikTok remains around, just under American ownership that solves these problems and these things. But I mean, we've talked a lot about just kind of the the manifest silliness of Trump's position on this. You could see a world where if Biden was confident that this was a political winner, he'd be hitting him on this. Like, look, Trump's bowing to his donors. Look, Trump's bowing to the lobbyists. But because they're just not sure, and because there's so much uncertainty also about what's actually going to happen with TikTok, it's just hard for these guys to triangulate, and so they're being a little bit more defensive and careful right now.
Yeah, I mean, this would be Biden's brand: bipartisan victory, foreign policy. You've done TikTok, now do Ukraine. There'd be an obvious brief speech to write for Biden from the White House podium, or certainly for at least Jake Sullivan or the White House press secretary. But I think they are nervous about it. I'll be curious to see if we get polling on it in the next week, and curious to see how everyone maneuvers about it. It'll be interesting. Well, keep up the good reporting on TikTok. It's an interesting topic, actually. It's an interesting foreign policy topic. It's an interesting domestic politics. A lot of things intersect, I feel like, in this one. And as you say, it kind of came out of nowhere, and you hear the words TikTok. I do. If you're my age and you think this can't be serious, but it actually, the whole information, operations, and how to handle China. Are we really pivoting to a new world where we treat China as a real strategic competitor, not just as another country, and we don't care if they own stuff here in the U.S.? I mean, a lot of interesting issues implicated by it, and we'll keep on covering it in Morning Shots and everywhere else on thebulwark.com, on our podcasts, our YouTube videos, and obviously on what's on the website and our newsletters. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for joining us.